Cannabis has always, I suppose, necessarily been a vice because it's also been illegal. How should we think of it today?
I think today we're seeing the end of a 95-year experiment in regards to prohibition, and we're seeing the start of a new era where Canada is the first G7 nation to legalize cannabis for adult use. I think Canadians should be proud, and the eyes of the world are on Canada as other countries around the world look to see how this experiment takes place in Canada.
You said earlier that you thought another country would, within a year or two, swing to also making it legal. Who would be the next candidate?
I think we'll see country 3, 4, 5 over the next 2 to 3 years. I think it's a country. I've been doing this for 8 years, and over the last 8 years, I've seen us go from 15 countries in the world that had legalized medical cannabis to about 35. It's really clear to me how we go from 35 to 40 to 50 to 60 over the next 3 years. If I had to predict a country that would be country number 3, it's definitely a country that has already legalized medical cannabis. And I think we'll see a country pass a law based on the laws and the regulatory framework here in Canada in the next 12 months.
Now, talk to me a little bit about the addressable markets here, because that's something I'm confused about. Is this just sort of moving people out of iniquity, or is a bigger market here in terms of actually bringing in new customers? And if that is the case, how do you get to them?
I think there's really three different markets that we're talking about. We're talking about a total addressable market of patients who are using cannabis as a substitute for prescription drugs and prescription painkillers, primarily opioids. And we're seeing that global growth of that market around the world. I think the second market is especially important in Canada, is a roughly $6 billion illegal illicit market in Canada that needs to transition to a legalized, regulated, taxed, safer product. And I think the third category is consumers who may consume alcohol today. That's certainly what we're seeing in some U.S. states where consumers are using cannabis as a substitute for alcohol, and that's what clearly has companies like Constellation scared about in terms of this industry.
Now, we'll get onto the financials in a moment, but I just want to bring up something that's actually on the website of Privateer Holdings, which is the biggest shareholder in the company. You're also the CEO there, where you talk about, once this becomes legal, generating enormous both financial and social returns. Can you talk to us a bit about those social returns and what they are?
So I think there's a number of social returns. If we look at prohibition and the harms caused by prohibition, they are numerous. A lot of our investors from around the world are interested in ending the harms caused by prohibition. So it includes drug war violence in Latin America and South America and in the U.S. It includes mass incarceration of predominantly, disproportionately African Americans and Hispanic Americans. It includes cannabis, treating cannabis as a criminal issue rather than more appropriately. And so those are some of the harms. It also means that people in the U.S. and people who access illicit cannabis don't have access to a legal, safe, tested, branded product. Many of them have to consume a product that may be contaminated.
Brendan,
untested,
let me just jump in on
unregulated.
that, because you're saying safe, tested, branded, but at the same time, we have Health Canada coming out today and saying that this could potentially cause a problem in 1 in 3 adults and addiction in 1 in 10. So that doesn't really seem to fit with what you're saying.
I think incident rates in Canada across provinces seem to be somewhere between 15 and 20%. I think that there's already a $6 billion illicit market in Canada today. So there's already $6 billion worth of cannabis being consumed in Canada. And that product it's unsafe, it's unregulated, it's untested. It may have mold, mildew, fungus, heavy metals, pesticides. And so as of today, Canadians have a right to access a safer tested product. And I think there are benefits, social benefits to that.
You talk about the size of black market there, $6 billion you overall say. I'm looking at your own market capitalization, $13 billion in excess of. How do you go about building moats around what you have built at Tilray, ensuring that you are ahead of the competition, innovating ahead of the competition?
So today we launched 5 brands across provinces from coast to coast in Canada. Currently, Tilray products are available in 11 countries on 5 continents. We expect to continue to expand to additional countries on a regular basis here over the coming years. It's a global growth opportunity. It's why you're seeing CPG companies and alcohol companies, functional food and beverage companies, pharmaceutical companies desire to enter this space because they're hunting for global growth. At a time where there's just not a lot of global growth. It's $150 to $200 billion. It will be $150 to $200 billion opportunity over the long term, and I expect you'll see multiple $100 billion market cap companies in this space in the coming years.
I want to talk about the stock, Brendan. You IPO'd at $17 back in July. You got to almost $300 a share back in September. You've come way down. You're now on a 2-day losing streak as Canada legalizes marijuana use for recreational purposes. What do you think of this stock movement overall? And how would you say that investors should value a company like Tilray? Should they compare it to a tobacco company, a healthcare company, a consumer discretionary company?
I think there's elements of all three, and I think that's what is being reflected in the value. The cannabis industry is disrupting the pharmaceutical industry. It's disrupting the alcohol industry. It's disrupting the functional food and beverage industry, and to some extent the tobacco industry. And we're seeing, companies from those industries are looking for partners in this space. From the IPO, the stock is up 800%. The thesis behind the IPO was that we had long-only blue-chip U.S.-based mutual funds who wanted a company to list on a U.S. exchange. They wanted a cannabis company to be regulated by the SEC and to report in U.S. GAAP financials. And we knew there would be interest in a company that did that. And so when we became the first cannabis company to IPO on a U.S. exchange, we were optimistic about the investor interest. But even we've been surprised by not only interest from investors in the U.S., but around the world in this global growth opportunity.
Brendan, you're talking about this, as you say, incredible run-up in the stock value. I think today you trade at about 90 times 2019 revenue. That's a growth stock, right? That doesn't behave like a normal CPG stock or a pharmaceutical stock, any that I can think of. What I want to know is, that's all based on the anticipation in the market of how this company is going to perform. How do you take it to, if you like, phase 2? How do you actually get out to the customers? Are you going to do sponsorship? Is it going to be a big advertising push? What's the play?
All of the above. So historically we've doubled revenue year over year, and we will triple our employee base this year. We started the year at 250 employees. We'll finish it with 750 employees. We're in a moment of global growth, not only here in Canada but around the world. And so we need to continue to keep our foot on the accelerator, not only as our revenues grow here in Canada, but as they grow in other medical cannabis countries around the world. We have partnerships with some online digital companies to help us identify potential customers and get the word out there around our brands. And there are also opportunities to do in-store events to build brand awareness.
Well, speaking of partnerships, we know that food and beverage companies have been tripping all over themselves trying to get a piece of the cannabis action, whether it's Constellation Brands or a company like Coca-Cola. What's the one risk that they are underestimating when investing in this space?
Timing is probably the biggest risk. I've been in this industry for 8 years, and 8 years ago, we predicted that country after country around the world would legalize medical cannabis, and we predicted that state after state, country after country would legalize medical cannabis. We knew what was going to happen. We didn't necessarily know when it was going to happen. And if I were a global Fortune 500 company looking at this industry, I would feel more confident today because of 35 countries that have legalized medically, and now two, as of today, 2 countries, Uruguay and Canada, that have legalized for adult use. I think timing is the biggest risk. I believe we'll see countries 3, 4, and 5 in the next 2 years, but that's the big unknown. But we know that other countries are looking at this regulatory framework being established here in Canada, and they're looking to implement a similar system.